restaurant sat on the top floor of a glass tower in the middle of the city, and everyone who worked there knew it was not a place for ordinary people. The tables were covered in white cloth so smooth it looked like snow. The chandeliers above sent soft golden light onto plates that cost more than some people earned in a week. Waiters moved without making a sound, as if they had trained their whole lives just to be quiet and polite at the same time. Richard Hale sat alone at his usual table in the corner, the one that faced the window and looked out over the city lights. He was the CEO of one of the largest shipping and logistics companies in the country, a man whose name appeared in business magazines and whose calendar was full months in advance. Tonight, he had allowed himself one quiet hour before his next meeting, a small luxury, in a life that rarely had room for pauses. He was reading through a stack of papers when he noticed a small disturbance near the entrance. He looked up out of habit, more than curiosity. A woman stood near the doorway. She wore a plain coat that had clearly seen many years of use, and her shoes were worn thin at the edges. Beside her stood a little boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, holding tightly to her hand. His eyes were wide as he looked around the room, taking in the lights, the soft music, the smell of warm bread drifting from the kitchen. The restaurant's host, a tall man in a black suit, was speaking to the woman in a low voice. Richard could not hear the exact words, but he understood the meaning. The restaurant did not usually seat guests without reservations, and even if it did, one glance at the woman's coat told the host everything he thought he needed to know. The woman nodded quickly, her cheeks turning red with embarrassment. She placed a gentle hand on her son's shoulder and began to turn him toward the door. That was when the boy spoke. His voice was small, but the restaurant was quiet enough that it carried across the room like a bell. "Mom, can we just get a little bread? You said you were hungry too." For a moment, nobody moved. The soft clinking of forks and glasses seemed to stop entirely, as if the whole room had taken a breath and forgotten to let it out. A few guests glanced toward the entrance, then quickly looked away, unsure what to do with what they had just heard. Richard set down his fork. Something in those words reached back through the years, past the meetings and the deals and the tall glass buildings, all the way to a small apartment where he had grown up. He remembered the sound of his own mother's stomach growling quietly at the dinner table, and the way she always said she wasn't very hungry that night, so that he could have a little more. He remembered pretending not to notice, because even as a child, he understood that noticing would only make her feel worse. He was 52 years old now, wearing a suit that cost more than the rent his family used to pay for an entire month, but for a moment, he was 7 years old again, sitting at a table with too little food and too much pride. He stood up before he had fully decided to. He crossed the room in a few long steps, ignoring the surprised look from a nearby waiter. When he reached the entrance, the host turned to him with a polite smile, ready to explain the situation. "Mr. Hale, is everything—" "Table for 3, Richard said, cutting him off gently. "They're with me." The woman blinked in confusion. "Oh, no, sir, that's very kind, but we don't want to intrude, we were just leaving." Richard looked down at the boy, who was staring up at him with curious eyes, still holding tightly to his mother's hand. "You're not intruding at all," Richard said, kneeling down slightly so he was closer to the boy's height. "In fact, you'd be doing me a favor. I hate eating dinner alone, and tonight, I have a table just waiting for company." The boy looked at his mother, silently asking permission with his eyes. She hesitated, torn between pride and hunger, between wanting to disappear and wanting, more than anything, for her son to have a warm meal. "Please," Richard said quietly, so only she could hear. "Let me do this. No questions, no conditions. Just dinner." Something in his voice must have told her he meant it, because after a long moment, she nodded. Richard led them to his table by the window. He pulled out a chair for the boy first, then for his mother, before sitting back down himself. The other guests in the restaurant had gone quiet, watching without trying to look like they were watching. A few phones came up from pockets and purses, capturing the unusual sight of a well-known CEO in a tailored suit, sitting across from a boy in a worn jacket. "My name is Richard," he said, once they were seated. "I'm Maria," the woman said softly. "This is my son, Ben." "It's nice to meet you both," Richard said, and he meant it. He waved over a waiter and ordered a basket of warm bread first, remembering how the boy's eyes had gone straight to the smell of it the moment they walked in. When the bread arrived, still steaming, Ben reached for a piece almost before the basket touched the table, then paused, looking at his mother as if to ask if it was really allowed. "Go ahead," Richard said gently. "It's for you." Ben took a bite, and for a moment, his whole face lit up in a way that made something in Richard's chest tighten. Over the next several minutes, Richard ordered a full dinner without looking at the prices, the way he always did when he ate here, though tonight it felt different. Soup first, warm and rich. Then a main course that made Maria's eyes fill with tears. She quickly tried to blink away. "You didn't have to do all this," she said quietly. "I know," Richard said, "but I wanted to." As they ate, Richard learned their story a little at a time, the way people share difficult things when they finally feel safe enough to speak. Maria had worked at a warehouse for almost 6 years, packing boxes and checking shipments, until the company suddenly closed its doors 3 weeks earlier, without any warning. One day she had a job, and the next day, the building was locked, with a small paper sign taped to the glass door, explaining that the company had run out of money. Since then, she had been searching everywhere for work, filling out applications, sitting through interviews that never led anywhere. Tonight, she and Ben had walked home from a meeting at a shelter, one that offered temporary housing help, and the smell of the restaurant kitchen had drifted out onto the street. Ben, tired and hungry, had stopped walking and asked if they could just look inside for a moment. "I told him we couldn't," Maria said, "but he wanted to see what it looked like, just once. I thought maybe if we stood at the door for a minute, it would be enough." Richard listened without interrupting, nodding at the right moments, asking gentle questions, instead of offering advice too quickly. He recognized the particular kind of exhaustion in her voice, the tiredness that came not just from hard work, but from constantly trying to protect a child from worry that was too heavy for a small heart to carry. Ben, meanwhile, had grown more comfortable as the meal went on. He asked Richard question after question, the way children do when curiosity finally beats out shyness. "Do you own this whole restaurant?" Ben asked. Richard laughed. "No, but I eat here a lot." "Are you rich?" "Ben," Maria said quickly, embarrassed, but Richard only smiled. "I have enough," Richard said carefully. "But I wasn't always this way. When I was your age, my family didn't have very much either." Ben tilted his head. "Really?" "Really," Richard said. "Sometimes there wasn't enough food for everyone, so my mother would say she wasn't hungry, even when I knew she was, just so I could eat a little more." Maria looked up sharply at that, understanding passing quietly between the two adults, a shared history that needed no further explanation. By the time dessert arrived, a small plate of chocolate cake that Ben eyed like it was the greatest treasure he'd ever seen, the tension in Maria's shoulders had eased. She laughed for the first time that evening, a soft, surprised sound, as Ben tried to eat the cake slowly to make it last, then gave up halfway through, and finished it in a rush. As dinner came to an end, Richard reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. He wrote something on the back before handing it to Maria. "This is the direct line to my company's hiring office," he said. "I called ahead while you two were finishing dessert. There's a position open starting Monday, in our shipping department. It's steady work, good pay, and benefits for you and Ben. If you want it, it's yours." Maria stared at the card, then up at him, her eyes filling with tears again, this time without any effort to hide them. "Why would you do this for us? You don't even know us." Richard thought about the question for a moment before answering. "Because someone did something like this for my mother once, a long time ago," he said. "A stranger paid for our groceries one week when things were especially hard, and never told us why. I never forgot it. I think about it every year on the same week, even now. I always hoped I'd get a chance to do the same for someone else." Maria wiped her eyes and nodded slowly. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what else to say." "You don't have to say anything," Richard said. "Just show up Monday morning." As they stood to leave, Ben tugged on Richard's sleeve one more time. "Will we see you again?" he asked. Richard crouched down to meet his eyes. "I hope so," he said. "But even if we don't, I want you to remember something. Being hungry once doesn't mean you'll always be hungry. Things can change, sometimes faster than you think." Ben nodded seriously. the way only children can, when they decide to hold on to something important. After they left, the restaurant slowly returned to its usual quiet rhythm, though something in the air felt different. A few guests wiped their eyes discreetly with their napkins. One older woman at a nearby table later told a waiter that in 30 years of eating at fancy restaurants, she had never once seen an entire room forget about its own dinner the way it had that night. Maria started her new job the following Monday, nervous but determined, carrying a folder of paperwork and a small photo of Ben tucked inside for courage. She worked hard, arriving early and staying late when needed, and within a year, she had earned a promotion to shift supervisor. 2 years after that, she was managing an entire section of the warehouse, training new employees the same way she once wished someone had trained her. She and Ben moved into a small but comfortable apartment not long after she got the job, one with a real kitchen where she could finally cook proper meals again. Every year, on the same week that Richard had helped them, Maria made a habit of buying groceries for a family she didn't know, quietly leaving them at a local shelter without saying who they were from. It felt right to keep the kindness moving forward, the same way it had once been passed to her. As for Ben, he grew a little older each year, his memory of that night slowly turning into something like a favorite story he liked to tell. He still remembered the warm bread, the chocolate cake, and the tall man in the nice suit who had knelt down to talk to him like he mattered. Whenever someone asked him what kindness looked like, he always thought of that same evening, the smell of dinner drifting into the street, and a stranger who had simply said, "Table for 3." Richard never forgot that night either. He still ate at the same restaurant sometimes, sitting at his usual table by the window, but now he found himself watching the entrance a little more closely, wondering if there might be another quiet moment waiting to happen, another small voice about to change the whole shape of an evening. He never sought out attention for what he had done. He didn't need it. He had learned a long time ago that the best kindness rarely asks to be noticed. It simply shows up quietly, offers a seat at the table, and lets the rest of the story unfold on its own.